Hello everyone, OG Rose here, speaking again with the one and only Bernard Hankins. We recently had a conversation about his extraordinary TEDx talk in Charlottesville, integrating people of color, and what that means, binary thinking, spectrum thinking. If you're interested, you can find it on YouTube, as you should be interested. There's also a paper about it on ogsrose.com. And we have had a talk about the general ideas, the main points of the talk. And what we want to do now is to get into the actual practice, the solutions to the problems, and what we think can be done to integrate people of colors, to make people stuck in binary thinking able to open up into spectrum thinking. So we just wanted to have a conversation about that. And what are your thoughts on that, Mr. Hankins?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is having a person who is actually a person of colors be a part of the administrative process. So that would be like step number one. And that can be on a number of levels. That could be from the birthing of whatever project you're trying to do, or it can be an ongoing person in the administrative day-to-day. Now, that can be difficult because most of the time you're not going to find that holy grail person who is creative and organized in the way the world considers quote-unquote organized.
Right.
But what you need is the input. If nothing else, you need the input of a creative mind to start off and say, hey, I know you think that's going to work from your traditional thinking,
right,
but as a creative myself, I'm telling you it's not going to work. So for instance, right now, I work in a music studio in school, and it's built right next to a library. So if I was there from the ground up, would I have said no? That's kind of debatable, because I might have been like, oh man, they're going to build a music studio. They might not build one at all. Yeah, put it next to the library.
Right.
But having experienced, the tension that it causes, it's quiet,
right, like
inherently quiet place next to inherently musical creating place,
right.
You realize like, oh yeah, this doesn't work, and it's next to a nurse's office.
Oh wow.
So nurses complain, oh, the kids have headaches, there's bass coming through, she's trying to do hearing tests, she can't hear. So I think I would like to say, I can't say it's 100%, but I would hope that a creative person in that initial meeting would have raised their hand and be like, hey guys, just a little note.
Right.
I love music, but I know you all might not love music. So we might want to reconsider where we're going to put this.
Yeah, and the artist, to that, I think the artist in school always is kind of like taking a crumb. So they're like, oh, at least we get a music, so I'm happily put it by the library. Where the science teacher would say, well, we're going to put the lab next to the football field in the open, where the band practices. And he was like, no, you're not. Oh, no, we're not. You're right, because this is science. This matters. We're going to put it in a space where the lab won't be disturbed by the band practices in the football field. So I think that, sometimes where artists can give into that is because they're like, well, if I say something, what if they say I'm not going to get anything at all? But the very fact that they're in that situation suggests where artists are on the hierarchy.
Well, something I saw that was interesting about back in December 2018, it was something my sister and mom suggested. I applied for it. I didn't get it, but it was still cool just to apply. It was an artist in resident in Norfolk, Virginia. And they were seeking someone who had all the things that I had, like architecture background, creative project, management, working with people. So basically, it was you would be hired for a year. They'd pay for your apartment, free apartment.
Wow.
And you would work with different municipal type people, being at meetings, I guess with engineers and planning artistic events. So that's when I say integrating people of colors, I mean literally integrating their thought process into the thought processes that normally happen. Oh, you're going to build a street over here? Okay. People are like, why do we need to talk to an artist? Okay, well, the artist is not necessarily going to give you the technical things that you need for a street, but they, as a spectrum thinker, are going to say, I noticed that a lot of mothers push their strollers down, blah, 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 and there might be some blah, blah, blah. They might get upset, and people are like, oh, wow, we didn't even think of that. You're putting the artist, inserting the person of colors into the thought process because they think of what you don't think of. So I think that's another barrier that people have with this, is that they think, well, we don't need artists because we already know what to do. It's like, But that's kind of the problem.
Yeah,
You're already excluding the new way of thinking.
That's right.
That's what they're contributing. Things that you wouldn't think of, and that's why they're there.
Well, it makes me think about, actually, downtown. They did some work on the road, and in the center of the intersection, they put this decorative circle, this big decorative circle. Well, everyone thinks it's a roundabout, so they're having all these problems at the intersection because they built these new roundabouts up the street in the downtown, and now they have this, so they've had to get on the news and tell people, hey, this isn't a roundabout, don't, try, because there's going to be a wreck, and they've had a lot of major problems, where it's almost like the binary, to use the term binary thinking from your talk, they go, oh, right, we need to be pretty, it needs to be pretty, we'll put in a circle in the middle, where the artist will be like, hey, because the artist, the creative person, not only has a mind that wants to beautify, but it also wants to design. They would say, well, that's nice, guys. Y'all trying to decorate, but actually you're going to have a lot of problems because it looks like a roundabout. And so it millions of dollars wasted because they didn't have that spectrum thinking.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think first point is integrate a person of color into the thought process.
Right.
Hire them as a consultant and consider their point of view, number one, valid. Number two, consider their point of view as contributing something that is not necessarily about how are we going to get this done technically, but how is this going to affect the social of part of the community? How is this going to affect the PR part of it? Because artists, they just, if you watch a movie, you're like, man, how did they think of that story? Just that thinking alone right there. The fact that you see a movie and say, oh, I would have never thought to do that. Exactly. That's why you need that person, because they're able to see a fuller picture of things that you don't see or that you're just less willing to look at.
Right.
But as you just described in your example, have an impact. There's people who, artists are observers. They listen. Someone complains about a street, they write a poem. Someone complains about a light post, they write a story. Like, artists are always listening to the sort of beat of the street, the pulse of the heart of people.
Right.
So if you want true feedback, you should listen to artists. I actually had an idea, hopefully people could take this and implement it. It was, if you want to really know what people think about the government, don't put out a survey. Or don't say, hey, do you have 5 minutes to take a survey? Because you're standing there, they're standing there, they're going to feel obligated to say, yeah, the city's great. But if you hired an actor, incognito, go into a community, spend a year there, just listen, take in, write notes, bring it back, and say, yeah, this is what people really think about you. They think they hate you or they love you. You're going to get true feedback with an incognito response. So that's another way in which you can integrate people of colors.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because researchers will go live amongst a tribe in the Amazon for a while to get the real information. But when it comes, it's almost like when you live in a country, like, oh, well, I know America. I don't need to do that. But if we're going to the Amazon, we got to live amongst the people and learn their language. And it's almost though, in that situation, the fact that it is kind of exotic makes you realize that you need to approach it differently. But things that feel familiar, you're like, I can use binary thing. When you really can't, it's going to create a illusion of understanding. And that feeling of understanding will actually hide your lack of understanding. So no, I mean, the idea of having the true creative in the administration is very powerful. The idea of having them there, so you design the space better. Is there anything you would suggest, say, on the period structure, the class structure, anything on how the day goes through?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the next point would be that of time. Now, time in the sense of creative anything requires a substantial amount of time and probably at least twice as much as you think it does. Because if you're a creative person, you've sat down, you're like, okay, today I'm going to write this poem story. And you're like, man, it's going to take a couple hours. And then midnight, you're like, what am I doing? Still sitting at this laptop. It can overcome you, can overtake you. So if that happens for a creative person, I can only imagine how much is going to happen to a person who doesn't consider himself creative. Right. But more importantly, time in the sense of, the school system doesn't really allot for time for anything that's not already been committed. If you look at the school system, like school I work at, they got the menus laid out. They got if we have a 1 hour delay, 2 hour, like they've got everything down to the minute, and you know how much teachers need to teach this subject according to the standardized, like everything is laid out. So once you try to introduce creativity into the mix, even though people want it, they all of a sudden realize like, oh wait, but we can't.
Right.
So then the people who are part of the creative process feel rejected because they're like, wait, but you just invited me into your class and you said we were going to do this project and you wanted, and now you can't. And I think I was going to say in the last talk we did, I don't even think it's like teachers are not interested, and even like administrators are not interested. But there's always the sort of idle of time. Well, we can't. You know, I'm sorry, there's just not enough time in the schedule.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of teachers who are open to bringing in people of colors, and they themselves probably have their own colorfulness that they want to, you know, contribute. But if they're locked into standardized tests and state tests, and you know, I'm gonna lose my job if the kids don't pass, it doesn't really give them the freedom or the flexibility to try and take risks because they're not given the reassurance that your job is okay. So on one level, it is an overall system problem. So I don't know how much hope I can say there is for changing it. But if someone's trying to start something new, I would say you need to definitely take into consideration there just must be given the time for the person of colors or philosophy of colors, we'll call it, to be incorporated into your whatever makerspace, building, school, program, workshop, committee, whatever you're trying to create. You need to take into serious account that's going to just require more time than you probably think it is.
Well, and, you know, that makes me think about, you know, Marshall McLuhan talks about the medium and the message, and there's a great thinker named Neil Postman who was very inspired by McLuhan. He wrote lots of books like Education is a Subversive Act, Education is a Conservative Act, The End of Education, great thinker. And he talked about how the very way the school system is structured, regardless of what is said, sends signals. So if I have a tight schedule and I have, like, you get an F if you don't do well and you get an A, then I'm saying to you that, like, for example, math is something that you wouldn't do unless you were forced to. And I'm saying that there are certain things that are worth scheduling limited time with that other things are not, and art is one of those things that doesn't fit, and therefore art is not important. Even though no one ever directly says that art is not important, the form sends that message to students. And also it says to students that these things are not things that you would do on your free time. There are things that you would only do if so forced. And so then we're shocked when they never use math. We're shocked when they never use science. We emphasize these things endlessly, but then also with the structure, you know, make them feel as if they're things that they won't do, and so they don't do. When in fact, when you're creative, you end up going, oh, to solve, you know, oh, I want to build this thing. Oh, I need math, so you go to math to use it. And you're like, oh, I want to make these characters. Oh, let me go to history. Like in the creative act, you then see everything as tools. Like I always think, and tell me if you agree with this, like the school should switch from subject-based to project-based to get people to accomplish projects, and then science, math, art become the tools by which to solve that project, and also projects themselves are inherently creative acts.
I mean, a lot of schools are that way. Our school, you know, talks about project, and you go to the teachers, you know, meetings and or you know big conferences. It's always like, yeah, project-based learning. That's like PBJ is like a big, the big thing right now. But there's still problems because, you know, one company says, you know, there's a difference between like project-based learning and a project as teaching using a project.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
So, but even with project-based, you know, there still has to be that sense of originality. You know, you can't just sign up here, do this project. It's like it has to come from within the child. It has to be something. Yeah,
well, that's exactly right, because you don't let the kids contribute. You don't let the kids pick the project, because it does seem like reading about these schools doing the project, but it's an example of putting your shoes in other people's shoes, like making it fit into the system, not changing the system around project thinking. And also, there's like a mono project everyone does as opposed to giving kids, hey, what's the project you want to do? Hey, and then directing it into other subjects to view as tools. And so that also then, because kids are always like, well, what am I going to use math for? What am I going to use this history for? And it's like, well, here, you're doing the thing you want to do, and these things actually enable you to do it. I know when I'm writing stories, suddenly, you know, I want to read historical pieces or learn history, or if, like a character I'm doing now, he's based on John Nash, so there's a lot of math, so you go and look up math to make the character realistic. It all fits together. But no, that's a very good point you bring up.
I think a third thing I would say, if you're trying to integrate people of colors or start some kind of philosophy of colors or integrate philosophy of colors into your system, is to define your goal. I know that sounds like obvious, but I find that most people who are trying to incorporate arts are usually doing it for the goal of we incorporated arts. Look at us.
It's a circular.
If that's your goal, I mean, just at least own it. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're just trying to say we want to show the county, the school system, the superintendent that we incorporated arts, well, just be upfront then.
Yeah. Because
what happens is people, they seek after all of this sort of innovation, and then the people who they're using are really they're really purpose driven people. They're like, oh great, so you want to bring paint into your class? We're like, why? And it's like, well, because like you can tell the person doesn't really know. They just know it's art and it's supposed to look good. So if you don't really have a goal as to why you're bringing art, you're really going to feel frustrated, because the person who's coming in to help is really seeking how to integrate that. That's the thing that's great about the people of colors, is like they actually want to integrate. They're like, I see art, I see math, I see how the two could come together. And I think that's the problem now with people who don't have that integrated left and right brain, is they don't really understand how the pieces go together. So that's something I've noticed in the school system, is like people want art,
right,
but they themselves have never done something like write a story or put together 5 or 6 instruments that work well in harmony and in rhythm. So their brain literally has not gone through that process repeatedly of, oh, this works with this, works with this, works with this, works with this, and they all come together and they all unite. Artists sit there and look at a canvas for hours just trying to get the red just right. It's too red, it's too blue. Oh, now they're clashing. Musicians, I'll sit there at a laptop for 8 hours, like, oh, that note, now move that note. Now that note is over. Like, now they're like, my brain is so trained into making things fit together, and not just in a clunky way.
Right.
But, they fit together in a way that's cohesive.
Right.
So the artist, the person of colors, naturally is going to look at your thing and their thing and say, well, I see how these two glue. We could try this. And I think that's why the person of colors is an asset, because the teachers normally don't have time to do that.
Right.
So, I mean, I guess a fourth thing I would say is, this is kind of related to number one, but you should consider hiring a person of colors as an ongoing position in your organization, because they will consistently be trying to glue everything together. You could have them navigate throughout different departments and be like, oh, they're doing this in science, oh, and they're doing this in the drama. You two might come together. Like, where I'm working at now, I haven't told anyone that this should be a job position, and maybe I should, but I could honestly see myself just being a person who roams throughout the school saying, yep, your student in this class is doing this, and they're doing that in their other class. There's a project for you. He's not motivated. Well, he loves this in this class. Why don't you integrate some of that science into the painting? Oh, wow, I never thought about that. I didn't have time to know. I know. That's why I'm here.
Interesting. No, something like that seems needed. That's very interesting. Would you say that there's a particular kind of artist that can do this sort of thing in the schools? Is it any given artist? Is there a certain kind of personality that the artist has to have? Let's say a school says they want to do what you're talking about. Is there some sort of characteristics that they should look for to make sure this is someone who's creative, who's a person of colors, but also will be able to do the thing you're talking about?
I had to think about that a little more, but I think off the top, what I think is, I don't know if it requires a particular like genre, like dancer, painter, musician. I think in general, most artists are very multi-intelligent, so to speak. They're very, very good at having multiple interests and be able to see many things at once. Being thinkers, being idea people, philosophers, and so you find that they tend to have thought about a lot, and tend to know how to see how the dots are connected. Right. But as a personality trait, I would say it's definitely someone who is autonomous. The artist is usually very autonomous. Right. They don't have to be told like, hey, we need you to come up with a thing, or hey, we need you. They are already like, yeah, I've gotten ideas. I've already done this workshop, or this is what I was thinking. Like,
Right.
the artist usually is coming with something to the table of like, hey, I noticed in the class y'all were talking about this. Well, this could actually link with this and this. So I think someone who's very autonomous, someone who, honestly, my main thing is someone who really is themselves.
Right.
Like someone
Right.
who is just really, truly a person who knows themselves, their own personality, because that makes students feel
Right.
comfortable. They're like, oh man,
Right.
I can actually talk to this person. They're actually a true human,
Right.
or they actually tell me what they think. It's not a, it's not a person trying to, be in control of me.
Right.
I think that's another interesting characteristic. Is like, it's someone who can be in charge but not in control.
Right. Well, tell me what you think of this. I think it would be fair to say that not everyone who calls themselves an artist is an artist.
Right.
So maybe what can be done is question when you bring them in for the interview and you're talking to them, you can say, what are things that you think we should do at the school system? What are your ideas for changing it? What do you think we do right? What do you think we do wrong? Sort of these very open-end questions, and if they just stare at you, then art is just a hobby for them. They're not a artist, these kind of... Because also, I know you talk in a lot of... You mention, you emphasize a lot in your talks the role of philosophy. And it's always interesting to me, the PhD means philosophy of, this, that, and so forth. And school used to be much more, especially if you go back to ancient Rome in the Forum, like this much more conversationalist, like idea, philosophical-driven thinking, which is very, very radically different from what we have today. I always loved, at UVA, oral tests. I despised multiple choice. I preferred papers, but I really liked the oral tests because it felt like you were actually going deep. But of course, that requires teachers who can do the oral test. So is there something to be said about the philosophical artist as opposed to just someone who calls themselves an artist, someone who can kind of think in those big, and then maybe even the need to integrate philosophy into school?
Well, I would think as a larger umbrella category, I would say, maybe the best way to sum it up, I saw this quote, I can't remember where, but it said, everyone who is an artist is creative, but everyone who is creative is not necessarily an artist.
Interesting.
And I thought that was the perfect way to sum it up, because there are people out there who are gardeners, or there's this one woman in Charlottesville, like, she loves to take kids out into nature and do these projects and teach them about the flowers. Like, to me, that's artful. You don't have to be an artist.
Interesting.
It's art-ish.
Interesting.
It's of the artistic. Like, someone who can find the meaning and the depth and the beauty in science. Because science is beautiful. And I said marine biology is beautiful. It's just not often presented as very factual.
Right.
So I think a person who can present their passion and their interests for all things, or can find a way to connect things that they might not really be interested in, or find something that they are interested in and be able to connect it to other things is what you're looking for. Someone who does art projects or is an artist, they may be someone who can come in and do like some workshops. They might, the way kind of people think about art now is like, oh, this is like a fun thing, kids, we need to liven it up, or, we want to bring someone into sort of, I don't know, like, I guess that just gets back to what I was saying, art is just sort of used as the icing on the cake in the last talk. But I think that, like, if you have somebody who doesn't really think or have a personal philosophy, so I'll be clear on that. When we say philosophy, yes, there's Socrates, Plato, other philosophers. But when I say philosophy, I mean I have a way of thinking about the world.
And to comment on that, Europe, they'll teach philosophy in the lower schools and different, but the problem is it's usually the history of philosophy, not philosophical being. And, when you listen to kids, they kind of sound like they're, and this I think is kind of really important, there's like this struggle to be philosophical. Like they'll say, it was wrong what he did to me on the date. Racism is wrong, or I don't like, or why do we go to school? What's the point of this? All of these are like this sort of groping to be philosophical. But then in not having teachers or a system to receive it, it just kind of stays groping and actually becomes a burden in some respects. I always find it interesting, like, every class at UVA prided itself on the Socratic method. And, like, there was only one or two that actually did the Socratic method. People think the Socratic method is, like, debating. But it's more like when somebody says, it was wrong that he dumped me. You go, oh, well, what do you mean by wrong? And they say, oh, well, he didn't give me a chance. He didn't explain it. He didn't confront me. Oh, well, why do you think it's important for someone to confront you? This sort of deepening, defining of terms, getting them to the core so they can articulate that feeling. And then once they can understand that feeling, they can create something with it. They can make something with it. They can changed by it. So that seems important too, to sort of like, because you just see it in kids trying to come out. Have you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, I think there's been times where, like, okay, here's a perfect example. For instance, this fits in nice. So it was after Donald Trump was elected, and people were very afraid of, like, oh no, this has never happened in our nation before. He made all this rhetoric about deporting Mexicans, and so some administrators were very afraid that there were going to be students in the class who were, Mexican, and that they might actually have those feelings. And, like, they were afraid that other students, I mean, I don't know if I can't remember if it actually happened, but, students can say stuff like, yeah, go back to Mexico. Right, so they were afraid of this sort of emotional uproar.
Yeah.
So they passed out, which I was actually kind of proud of. It was cool, but it's still, again, it's kind of surface level.
Right.
They passed out, like, a worksheet to everyone with, like, Socratic method or, like, philosophical chairs. Or there was, like, different little sort of kind of almost kindergarten-esque, like, philosophical tools to spark conversation in the classroom. So I was like, oh, this is cool. I actually like these exercises, and at least they are trying to do something philosophical.
Right.
But I think, again, it goes back to what I was saying about point number 2, I believe, about time. There's just not enough time.
Yeah, that's so important.
To really get into the fears of someone who's afraid of getting deported or the family's getting deported, because, it's not like they were really able to make time in the science class. In my class where we actually do podcasts, it's like open all the time to discuss, and it's a culture of discussion.
It's a culture, that's key.
And maybe in history class, the teacher felt more like, okay, well, we can put this aside for the day, because this is very relevant and true about the democracy and the Constitution and deportation and immigration and all these laws, and you could actually connect it to the curriculum. But if you're in math class, I mean, I think a teacher might even brought this up. What am I supposed to do? They were like, I'm supposed to be like, so quadratic method and Socratic method. So who's afraid of you? All right, well, you can't taking 5 minutes out to just sort of surface level address someone's fears. It's like saying, hey, we kind of care.
It almost makes it worse. There's almost an element where it's like, oh, we know this is a problem, and we're gonna pat you on the back, and then keep moving. Like they're not prepared for it. But the creative person is prepared for the unexpected.
Right. And you have a creative person, I mean, it's like you're kind of caring. You're trying to at least show that you care. You're not dismissive, but you're also not creating the actual time to give it what is needed. Like if it was something very much like, okay, you all, I know there was a scary moment that happened in the city earlier today. Does anybody need to talk really quickly? Right. But if you're actually it's national news and you've heard the person on the TV say stuff, you're really afraid. Right. So to just be told like, well, we'll try to deal with this after we get through our, standardized test requirements. Right. Person's be like, great, I don't really care. Right. Makes me think of one of our friends, Marcello. Right. He was saying that, when 9/11 happened, I don't remember if he was in New York, but he said he heard about 9/11 on the television, and he said, he let the kids watch it, and he spoke. Right. Like he was like adamant, like this is something that needs to be spoken about. They need to be explained. You can't just leave them in the dark, even if they're young. So I think it takes a person with that kind of flexibility and adaptability and humanity to say, you know what, the school curriculum says this, the state says I have to do this, but this matters. Like this is a human moment. So I think if you back to your other question about what kind of characteristics does a person need, it needs to be someone like that who's willing to break the rules.
That's key. I think
when it's like important. Not life or death. Like we're not saying you don't do what's important. Right. We're saying like there's certain moments that the rules need to be broken because this matters just a little bit more.
Oh no, I think that ability to on the spot improvise, flexible, takes unexpected information, create something understandable, comprehensible for the students, that is just absolutely important. Because again, I just think back to the tradition of learning where the teacher actually didn't really know ahead of time necessarily what was going to be taught. They would come in and they would say, okay, did you read Aristotle? What do you think? And they'd have to respond to whatever the student said. This sort of very open-ended. And see, that method was so important because then the student, maybe they didn't really read Aristotle. They had to be forced to read Aristotle. Sometimes there is a little bit of the push the bird. But once they did, they got to talk about what they found interesting. And the teacher would respond to that, and it would go back and forth. I mean, teachers try to do that. They go, so what did y'all think? Okay, so what were the main characters in Hamlet? Like, there's this moment of sort of, like, opening. But But there's also this part where like kids need 10 minutes to like warm up. You don't go to the oven, turn it to 300 and shove the steak at you. Let it preheat. There's no preheating in class. There's no time for it.
Well, there's a couple things I'm thinking of. One, taking the idea of time and the characteristic. So taking these two main points that we already discussed. Time and a person who is flexible, adaptable, humanity. Both of those things are very important because if you're a teacher and you're trying to connect with other humans, you understand that the thing that seems inefficient now to like play games and get to know each other and ask questions about things not related to the subject matter in the long term is going to be much easier, because when this child trusts you to talk about your life and their life, they then say, oh wow, if Mr. Hankins was willing to share that about his family, I guess I could surely trust him on how to do this math problem, because that's nowhere near as vulnerable and intimate and important. So I know, again, so back to merging that with the time. In this current school system, I just don't think it can happen. Because as much as a teacher wants to connect and tries to be human, they're literally looking at their watch because they're like, oh, I only have 90 minutes to teach this thing. Because I got to speak in front of a group of Curry school education class, like couples last summer, I think. And so the lady said, this is my teachers who are students who are going to become teachers. And so she wanted to bring us in, me and Chance, and talk about stuff we did with the A3 house. And so, we came at them with all this stuff. I did, the God's hard drive poll. We had students talking. We were talking about all these different things. And part of me, while I was talking, I even said to them, was like, I know for you all where you're going that this may not even be possible. So part of me was like, why are we up here telling them this? And I guess part of it was just like to give you some kind of hope that you can do a little. I tried to give them little nuggets. I said, look, I understand you're going into a system where you're going to be very confined. I said, but at the least you can do something like make your students feel seen. Like if that means the first day they get to fill out a sheet of paper that talks about their favorite musicians and their favorite, you post it on like something that in the classroom, taking a picture of each of them or something and put. So I was able to impart a little nugget. But at the same time, I was like, this isn't really going to work. What we're talking about, this is going to work for the system that you're in, but it's not going to really work and be able to blossom. So the time part and the adaptability part, the flexible person, I think they go hand in hand, because the teacher who's willing to just be like, okay, we're supposed to do this first. Oh, we're supposed to go through. All right, get that out of the way. This is what this room of kids needs. And they're able to look beyond. So I guess if you'd add another attribute, they're able to look beyond the sheet of paper.
That's right. Yeah, and we have to be understanding. I mean, teachers are put in a situation where they have to manage 25 personnel. The kids don't always want to be there. They can be rowdy. They can be difficult. I mean, the teacher knows physics, but they don't know how to personality manage, and the system doesn't give them many resources. I mean, teachers are put in a very difficult bind, and it would seem to suggest that the whole macro situation, the whole macro system needs to be changed. And I think that's where we see the no school movement, the Montessori. There's this sense that needs to be done, but unfortunately, that always is going to be in favor of the middle upper middle class people, of whom arguably don't need it as badly. We all need it, of course, but they arguably don't need it as badly. Because I'm thinking of the teachers I know and how they spend so much time just trying to get the class to sort of listen, to kind of calm down, to pay attention. And some people may hear this talk on creativity and be like, are you kidding me? You're going to insert creativity, make it more chaotic? It's already chaotic. But I think what it's important to realize is when we talk about integrating people of colors, there's this empathetic, emotional development, this personal development. I mean, if the family's not doing anything, there can sometimes only be so much that the teacher can do, but sometimes the family's not doing what they're supposed to do of no fault of their own. It becomes very complex. But, it's almost like if you have the student who's not listening, who's difficult, the teacher could sit him down and be like, we both know that you don't listen in class, that you don't want to be here. Why not? What's going on? And then to actually make the student feel like they can be honest and not get kicked out of school. You know, like there's like, well, this is why, and this is what. Well, and then you go, okay, well, what would you like to see different? You know, what would you like us to do? Where the teacher has a space to view the student as part of the creative process, as being able to integrate and tell them, because usually if kids aren't listening or part of it, there's a reason. They're not interested. They're dealing with something, and it's just very difficult to create that space to where they can get over those things.
Well, the thing that I'm thinking about is typically in our culture, you see something like an artist, and then there's a person who comes along who's a producer, and they're like, hey, kid, you need me because you don't understand how the finances and the admin where I could take you places. And the artist is like, oh, really? Great. So they kind of put themselves in the hands of the producer, and the producer's like, see how I took you, kid? It's almost like in this context, that role is flipped.
Interesting.
Where you have the person of colors coming to the more administrative person and saying, hey, look, I see you're trying to like touch that dimension of humanity in the kid, but you don't really know how to do it. It looks like just put me in your hands, put yourself in my hands, and I'm gonna help you. And I think that's probably harder for people, because if you're an admin person, you're so used to telling people what to do. For you to have to sort of give over control and yield and like, oh, this person can do this thing I can't do is difficult. It takes some humility, right? But I think, you know, this is not really one of the main points, you know, like the person of color, time, you know, the other points we brought up. But it is a huge point to say you're going to have to start to see yourself in a different light in order to accept a person of colors. To say, why am I going to let this person come in to my classroom or my organization and be flexible and adaptable? It's like, well, because you can't. Right. Or you haven't figured it out. And it's not like, it's not that they're taking over. They're supporting the part which you can't do. Right. Like they're bringing relief. Right. You're, and this connects back to the goal. If your goal is, man, we want our, you know, yearly report to say we helped this many kids and we made our quota of this and that, and we integrated the arts, blah blah blah. Then like you probably need to consider bringing in that person who can assist you in doing that and realize their value is to do that, and for you to sort of get out of the way and be happy, like, great, now I can solely focus on the admin stuff because that's what I do well. So I think some of the mental things that people have to get over is just realizing the place for the person of colors. And I think that's what people, that's probably their first initial block. They're like, why are we doing this? Right. And sometimes it's kind of a, you know, chicken and egg thing. It's almost like the creative person of colors has to come in, present their ideas, show you, and then it's like, oh, now that I've seen it in action, now that I sort of witnessed it amongst my organization, now I get it. But it's kind of hard to imagine, especially if you don't use your imagination. It's hard to sort of imagine why you need an imaginative person. Right.
And it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because, you know, you say, why do we need them? In the back of your mind, you think you don't. You bring them into a system where they don't have the space or they don't have the ability to do what they do well. Therefore, they don't do well. And you say, see, told you. And it's kind of set up for failure from the start. It's... It would also seem as if creativity is only viewed as valuable to the degree it gets you a job. And in that sort of context, it is kind of difficult to explain how the spectrum thinking gets you a job, but it does. And then when it does, it's kind of obvious. You know, the guy is able to come up with the business plan or the idea or see, oh, actually, if we market this way, we're gonna do very well. But there's kind of a sense in which, you know, they view creativity. It's like, oh, well, we can come up with it. We can worry about that later. Like, when we get to the place in the meeting, we'll be there. All the guys will be there. We'll be able to come up with something. There's kind of this, we don't need to really focus on it now because we'll deal with it later. But imagine if kids were like, oh, we don't need to learn math. We'll learn math when we need it. Oh, we'll learn science when we need it, or history when we need it. Like, it'd be like, no, you're going to learn it anyway because you need it now. That would be considered unacceptable. But this sort of idea of pushing it off, we'll get to it, I can do it, I can paint, anyone can paint. We all did it as kids. That also seems to contribute to the sort of extra-ness that the creativity is ascribed.
Yeah, I think the last couple things I'll say is, one, having a person of colors integrated into your birth of whatever project or being an admin person or partner, is like having a translator, because that person can translate the value that is hidden, the gold that is hidden in your program that you might not be able to see. Partially because the person of colors tends to have a different metric. In school systems, policy, it's always usually what are our numbers, how many students were saved from the streets, or whatever. People are always trying to measure things in numbers of students. Versus the story of that one student who didn't come to school, but now at least comes to school. I mean, I've had students tell me, he's like, Mr. H, he's like, you want to be honest, the only reason I'm here today is because of this class I'm in with you. Like, I have had students who say the only reason they come to class is because of the type of class, but also the person that me and Chance Dickerson, we were being ourselves, open, human, empathetic, flexible, adaptable. We were true to ourselves and open with them, that they felt safe, comfortable. So part of it is you're gonna have to give yourself permission to have another metric system. Think of it like that. It's not like you're switching. It's like, guess what? I get to have two metrics. But it's just a different way of measuring. And one of the measurements is anecdotal. Stories. Narratives. I always use as examples, if I went to a child and said, give me some reasons why your dad is a good dad. He's not going to say, well, yesterday he brought home 2.5 loaves of bread, and then he took me outside for 1.2 hours. He's going to give you an anecdote. He's going to say, my daddy took me to the amusement park, and we got on the Ferris wheel, and he grabbed me and gave me... You're going to hear a story. No parent wants to hear their child say, Father, I know you've been here for 365 days this year, and it shows me that you love me, and I will report to the child services that you have been a good father because you've been present. And no, they're going to be like, Daddy!
That's your quota.
There's an emotional release.
Yeah, when the kid gave you that story, you wouldn't say, well, that's just an anecdote. That's just a story.
It's an anecdote, Father. Where's your data? So, the person of colors being integrated into the process is going to be able to communicate value to you that you may not see. Like, hey, his dad said horrible stuff about him, but he came to this class because he said he's so thankful that this class is a safe space. Guess what? You help provide the budget for that. Like, your sense of humanity is going to feel increased. Like, wow, I am valuable because I provided the space and the money and the supplies for this person to be able to do what they do, and then they affected that child. I did that. So there's an ego boost there. So, related to that, I think you need to realize there's a metric system that is about people. And it's not necessarily something that's going to be, well, you can quantify it. You can write it in a story, a newsletter. You can put it on the website. Look, this person said this. You can do a video, a podcast. You can record the student saying, I was this way and now I was this way. It's like it's just a different type of measurement. And so I think part of the problem now is that people don't have a measurement system for that, partially because there really isn't one. You don't want to turn everything into a number. You want to turn it into a human. You don't want to always so how many kids felt like they were transformed by this program? It's like, well, Sarah said she was, but I don't think we want to just trivialize it and make it about a number. So I'll end on a couple stories related to that. One is, well, before I say the two stories, I'll say I think there's a push now. I've seen these I think it's the 6 C's. I can't even remember. It was creativity, collaboration, citizenship. There's some 6 C's. I don't remember if it came from the government or just school level. But there's 6 C's that are considered the future of education. Collaboration, creativity, citizenship, and some others. Interesting. So I think there's definitely a push now for, like you were saying, being more empathetic. And especially in the wake of, where we are in our culture now with white supremacy, everybody's like, we need more empathetic people and kind, compassionate, considerate people. There's a push to make sure that students are not just learners. Or not just learners of knowledge, facts, but learners of each other, learners of emotion, learners of compassion, learners of humanities, which is why we need to bring back the humanities, the philosophies, the arts. So if your goal is to see a full student, a full human, a full person who is not just smart, but emotionally smart, heart smart, to be able to look at another student and say, you know what, that'd be wrong for me to do that, or you know what, that person needs help today. You know, let me close my math book and like be a shoulder. If you're looking for that full finished product, you need to have a person of colors because they're going to be able to create the kind of atmosphere and see those values in the classroom and draw them out in ways that a person who doesn't consider himself a person of colors isn't going to see themselves that way. So I think that, to put back to, for the other talk, the imagination leads to empathy. That's one reason you need an imaginative person in the classroom to spark the imaginations of other kids to have empathy, to spread the seed so that you can reach the goal. As I said before, like, what is your goal? Is your goal just to have smart kids? Or is your goal to have smart kids who are also compassionate and kind? If you want to have smart, compassionate, kind kids, then you need someone who is an expert in empathy.
In those things.
A professional imagination person who can teach empathy every day and practice being it in person and practice putting it in those persons.
If I were to ask you quickly, to use, let's say, the August 12th in Charlottesville, and you're a history teacher. How would a binary, to use that language, a binary history teacher teach August 12th as opposed to a spectrum history teacher teach August 12th?
Well, I think a binary teacher would kind of address the reality of what took place, but then ask some kind of surface level or generic what can we do questions, or I guess I don't know if they have the tools to go beyond addressing it or just acknowledge
let's say it's 50 years from now and they're teaching.
Well, let's hope we're not in this position 50 years from now.
Yes, indeed.
It's kind of hard to do it without being a caricature. So
right.
But in a caricature form, I think a binary person would say
facts. Dates,
Robert E. Lee statue was historical. It was still there in Charlottesville. It was an event in time. We see the rise of white supremacy we'll see like a graph. Look, the white supremacy went up during Reconstruction. Maybe dipped some during civil rights. Obama was president. White supremacy goes up. Trump, it goes up more. They would kind of describe it in factual terms. They would describe it as historical data points.
How many people were there? What time the march on Friday was with the torches, kind of things like that.
Whereas a spectrum thinker would do something like show Schindler's List, but for August 12th version. Giving you the stories, the music, the culture, the narratives of individuals, the micro stories that you don't hear about. That's what I think a spectrum person would tell stories, not history. They would tell stories of individuals. When you read like Anne Frank, I read that book in 9th grade. And it was like, I still remember that book. It's like, it's a story of a little girl, near your age. You're like, oh my goodness, this happened to her. So I think the story, the narrative, the human element is how the spectrum person thinks, because they connect with their own personal self first. And they realize oh, you're a kid. You have a story. I think that's what I noticed. I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit. But I think the thing in my classroom that I pride myself on is I acknowledge that these people are not just little people. You are a human.
You do a very good job of that.
You're a human, and you matter, and you have a story, and your ideas, no matter how underdeveloped, still you're questioning, what does it mean to be a man or a boy? What does it mean to be, black? And you have real questions, and I open up the floor in the podcast. What do you think? What is your story? How did that make you feel? I asked them, what do you think about teachers in the school? Do you feel it's unfair? Why are we unfair? I let them have at me, so to speak. So I think spectrum thinker would use a different, it's almost like a higher level of empathy. Because it takes a higher level of empathy to be well, I'm a teacher and I got a degree and I went to college. I don't listen to you, little kid. I'm here to teach you. It's no, a true teacher realizes that you can even be taught by someone
Yeah.
younger than
Absolutely.
you, not because their age, they could have come from some other country where they've had way more experience than you, and
different frameworks,
different experience, different frameworks, and even just the uniqueness of what they are. Like I love hearing kids' ideas because they'll say something that makes me go, "Oh my goodness, that's like." There's this one kid, he suggested an idea for a project, and I was like, "That's such a great idea!" Like when another kid suggested we should do a T-shirt, like that's I would have never thought of that. Like just
Oh no! I mean, it's crazy because even the smartest person on this planet knows 0.0001% of everything there is to know, and so, Neil Postman in The Disappearance of Childhood talks about how if you look at medieval art and art before that, children are depicted as just small adults, and it wasn't. He theorizes that it was the Gutenberg press that began the shift toward an adult was someone who knew how to read. And so then came the whole idea of immaturity, the whole idea of undevelopment, as opposed to going, oh, they're just a small temple of God. They're just they're a full human being. They just don't know the same skills, but they are mature. Right. Like now we have this kind of mindset where they're like not ready until they're adult to handle or to speak or to do certain things. And the interesting enough, the apprenticeship model was not based on a model of immaturity, but hey, you're an adult, so you're just going to kind of watch me and figure it out on your own. You can do it. I'm going to teach you certain things, but you are autonomous. You are an individual. So I think that notion of immaturity is problematic.
So like I said, I'll end on these two stories. And I think this relates to what I was saying about what kind of person are you trying to produce? What is the final product? And I think we all want students who can stand on their own and think for themselves and present their own points of view and defend their own points, hear other people's points. Right. So there was one story, we were in the music studio during lunchtime. That's the other thing that's always...
They're coming during lunch.
Yeah, people are there because they feel safe and they'll do stuff when you don't ask them.
Right.
So there's a bunch of people, some listen to music, some sitting around, and one, he was a more mature student, had lived in New York, he was like 19, senior. He said something like, y'all know what? He said, Donald Trump is good for our country right now. And so all the black students were like, what did you just say? He's like, nah. She said, check it. Donald Trump is like being this mirror to our country. He's bringing all of this ugliness out that people don't think is there anymore. He's like, we need this right now. And so the one girl, she was like, yeah, all right. Like, I don't agree with exactly what you're saying, but I understand what you're trying to say in terms of like this can, it can have it can bring something out of it. But so here they are having this discussion, I didn't motivate this. They're just doing it because we've created the culture. Right. And then the bell rings, and I'm like, oh, now they're gonna have to go to a classroom, a history class, and not have that organic, authentic discussion. Right. But the fact that the two of them on their own, did that is like, wow. Like if you create the environment, create the context, the conditions, the support, the trust, like they will start to do that on their own. Yeah,
and to add, everyone's like, we need to have discussions about racism and different things like that. But if you have a white kid and a black kid, and you're like, all right, discuss racism, anything they do is going to feel like ingenuine and fake. But if you just have like the botanist environment, the greenhouse, and then the white and the black kids start having a discussion, that's actually going to do something.
And it happens. Oh well, there's a lot of things going in there because you'll have like there's this one kid in there. He plays like, your classic rock, Led Zeppelin, but then he'll be like, oh, Mr. H, one of my favorite albums is Notorious B.I.G., like he loves hip hop from the 90s, but he loves Led Zeppelin. Right. You got other kids in there like, oh, they're black, they only listen to hip hop. You come in there, catch them, listen to Miley Cyrus and Paramore. It's like, there's just all these preconceived perceptions that we have of one another, but then when you get into the environment where music is allowed to flow and people are allowed to share their true interests, you're like, wait, we're actually not that different.
Well, and without that environment, how are people going to find out their stereotypes are wrong? Right. People have stereotypes because they think they're right. And if they're like stuck in a desk, never talking with one another, they never have experiences that make them go, oh, my generalities are wrong. We tell them don't have generalities, but they don't have a space in which to like form something else. And it just reminds, like, I'm thinking of Hike when you say that, where he talks about the economy is a a greenhouse where creating conditions for plants to grow, not an engine to tune. We treat kids like robots. Then we need to tune the parts as opposed to making environments.
Yeah. So I said 2, but I'll give you 2 more.
Yeah.
All right. So 3 stories. So have this one student, really good music producer, makes beats all the time. Been making for a while. Has like a really old laptop, but he just works through it. It turns off. He teaches other kids how to make beats. Shows them like, yeah, you need to fix your kick, your hi hat. Nah, this is So he makes beats. He's consistent. He's made a lot. He helps other people. I remember one day we were sitting in the studio, and I can't remember if it was off a beat that he made or if it was just like beats they were playing. But then like everybody got together in a Cypher and started rapping. And he looked over at me. He said, "This is what I always wanted. Like, this is like what my dream, like just to have life and be alive and like he was dead serious. First I thought he was like joking, like, but he was like dead serious. Like, this is like what I always wanted. Wow. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like you don't realize how much this stuff means to someone. And I think particularly because his mom doesn't really like encourage or support what he's doing at home too. Right. And like there's definitely times when there were a few times where we like closed down the studio during lunch and he was like, but like that's my home. Like, like he was really let down that it wasn't open during lunch. He really appreciates it. So that's one story. I mean, if you want to make a meaningful, valuable, anecdotal, metric impact, stuff like that, kids going home being like, thank you for the studio. Like, thank you for the studio.
Right. Thank you for the studio. Right.
So the last story, especially, if we want to really get into, toxic masculinity, Gillette commercials, and, you want to make people better humans. So probably the most impactful story from this year, had 4 boys in our class. We have 2 levels, audio 1, audio 2. They were like, Mr. H, we want to do a podcast. So again, there's that culture. Like, I didn't spark it that day, but they just are aware at any time, hey, we can do a podcast. Right. And I was, all right, I'll be there in a minute. Let me help this other student. So I come over there, I hit record on the recorder, and I didn't even need to be there, honestly, because they orchestrated the whole thing. I hit record. I was going to chime in with some questions and try to guide, and I realized in that moment when to be quiet. There's times to talk, there's time to be quiet. Right. So first it started off with them talking about, how come girls, they talk about, they want a man who's, blah, 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 but then they themselves be doing stuff to make themselves look valuable. Right. So it started off, it was a pretty, substantive conversation, but then it kind of trailed off. And I was about to, I think I did stop it because they said, oh yeah, we done. But then they kept talking a little bit, so I was like, record again. And so then they started talking about, man, at night sometimes, I just be walking in the middle of the street because, I'll be thinking about my life and I'm looking for balance. And, people think I'm funny all the time, but I'm serious. And then, other boy heard, and he's like, oh, we're talking about real stuff. So he came and sat at the table. He's like, oh, we're talking about fathers and stuff. So he just laid out all his stuff about stuff with his dad and finding out his dad's not his real dad or the stepdad. Like, just different stuff. And I'm like, he's pouring this out in the classroom in front of me and 3 other boys. Wow. And there's other people in the class, too, like on the outskirts. But it's out in the open. Talking about my father. Found out this guy, guy, I forgot the exact story, but basically father stuff, deep stuff. Right. And there's other boy, so he started like, tearing up and crying. They were like patting him on the back and like, he's like, yeah, man, let it out, blah, blah, blah. So then the other, student, he was like, yeah, man, he's like, I don't ever see my family and my dad, he, I don't ever see him. And when I do see him, he's like, yeah, man, you getting some booty in high school. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I ain't trying to talk about that. He's like, I want to have a real conversation with my father. Right. And then the other boy was like, yeah, that's facts. So you would never think you would hear like teenage boys talking about, yeah, I don't want to talk about sex. You know, you would think, no, all the teen boys, all they want is to talk about sex. But here it's like 4 boys talking about like, no, I want a genuine, intimate connection with my father. Right. My question is, when is that going to happen in school? It's not going to happen in math class. It's not going to happen in science class. It's not going to happen in PE. It's only going to happen in a kind of person of colors environment that you create to allow that type of deep emotion and that safe environment to come out. So if you want any other reason to integrate a person of colors, whatever motivation you need, toxic masculinity, making men more empathetic, this is your reason. If you want to see a culture where men think, feel, empathize. You need to create the space where they feel safe and they have the freedom of expression. And part of freedom of expression is often through a creative expression. So we need to make sure that boys, girls, men, women, everybody, but in this case particularly, these men feel that it's okay to express their emotions creatively.
Wow. Well, everyone, this has been a conversation with Bernard Hankins, the one and only. It's on the importance of integrating people of colors. This has been talking about actual practice. You can learn more about Bernard at bernardhankins.com. You can see his TED Talk, Integrating Peoples of Colors, on YouTube. And Mr. Hankins, thank you so much for your time. It's always a delight.
Thank you.